My name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today, via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guest Dr. Jeffrey Richmond Mall from the Peabody Essex Museum. Jeffrey serves as the George Putnam Curator of American Art. Recently, he was the organizing curator of the current outstanding exhibition entitled Making History: 200 Years of American Art from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. During the program, we'll learn why and how the exhibition came about. We'll go on a behind-the-scenes tour and in the process come to better understand and appreciate what it meant to be an American artist at the time of the nation's founding and what it means to make art in the United States today. Let's start by meeting Jeffrey and then hearing all about Making History: 200 Years of American Art from the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which is on display until September 21st. Welcome, Jeffrey. So delighted you're able to be here.
Thank you. So great to be here too, and thanks for having me.
And first of all, just congratulations on what's turning out to be a blockbuster of an exhibition. I was there a couple of weeks ago, learned so much, eager to find out more and have you inform viewers. But before we jump right to that, I think it would also be of interest if you just briefly share a little bit more about your background, perhaps academic, professional interest, please.
Sure, happy to. So I arrived here at the Peabody Essex Museum in October of 2023 when I became the George Putnam Curator of American Art. And here at the museum, I oversee about 4 centuries of American painting, sculpture, works on paper. And at PEM, we think pretty broadly about what it means to be an American artist. We think about these kind of vast networks that make up the story of American art. So we're thinking about the really the role of artists across North America, the intersections with Native American art and culture as we have installed our permanent collection at the museum and on this ground being and belonging in America, our long-term exhibition of American and Native American art. And so that's really my responsibility, is to steward our collection and organize exhibitions around this great sort of project of American art at the museum that has a really long history. Now, for myself, before I came to PEM, I was the curator of American art at the Georgia Museum of Art, which is the University of Georgia's art museum down in Athens. I was there for about 4.5 years, organized a number of shows kind of across American art history, painting, works on paper, photography projects. And then before that, I earned my PhD from the University of Delaware. Spent a number of years working in museums, including years ago at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. This was one of my first jobs out of college, was to be an intern with the curator who organized this show when it premiered in Philadelphia several years ago. So it's been a full circle moment coming to PEM, having this be the first show that I've worked on and opened at the museum, really kind of brings me back and also pulls me forward, and this great opportunity to experiment with and play with and think deeply about an amazing collection of American art that was really a part of my origins of being a professional museum curator.
With that said, as far as your mission as curator of American art and what the Academy has to offer, seems like just a natural collaboration. Could you share a little bit about how that developed and worked and how the exhibition complements or differs from Pennsylvania?
Sure. So this exhibition was organized by the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts several years ago, and then they worked with a group called American Federation for Arts, which helps travel exhibitions like this around the country. So PAFA and AFA are the acronyms we use. They worked together to travel this show to 6 different museums nationwide. We're the 5th museum in this 6-venue tour. And we signed on to this exhibition tour because, for one thing, PAFA's collection is incredible. It is, in terms of its depth of particularly American painting from the 18th century to the 21st, it is just has amazing examples by the kind of icons of American art, names that you might recognize from, you know, Mary Cassatt and Gilbert Stuart to Georgia O'Keeffe and Andrew Wyeth and Winslow Homer. But there are also so many amazing works in this collection by artists whose stories are not as familiar. And that's one thing this exhibition really does so well that I feel like we at PEM were drawn to was helping visitors to encounter works by artists who, who we sort of what I hear often in taking visitors through the exhibition is, why have I not heard of this artist before? This work is so amazing. Where have they been? Why have and the story of this show is really a story about the many different artists who have contributed to the story of American art and American culture, and the really diverse array of artists that PAFA's collection represents, which we just felt like it was such a great opportunity, and in a way very easy for me as a curator to just say, let's let the work shine, because there's so many poignant and beautiful and powerful objects in the show.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I learned so much, got exposed to so many outstanding artists that I have to say I wasn't familiar with. So definitely appreciative of that. What went through your mind, some of the thinking of organizing the exhibition for the PEM space? Your thoughts, collaboration with others at the museum?
Sure. Well, every exhibition at PEM is a true team effort. And also, every exhibition at PEM, even if it's a traveling show that has been packaged for us to take and has been traveling in one particular form around the country, takes on its own guise, it bears PEM's imprint whenever we get our hands on it. So this exhibition was, certainly no exception to that. And we thought, as I said, PAFA's collection and the story of the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, which has this long history in both exhibiting fine art in this country for over 200 years and training generations of American artists for over 200 years. That was a story we wanted to tell, but there was even a bigger story that we felt like was present within the works in the exhibition that we wanted to draw out, which was, how have artists played a key role in sharing and reframing our nation's history? How is making art really a process of making history, and therefore, this is where the title comes from, making history. How is art making central to our relationship with the past and the way that we see our history manifested in the present and envision our own future through the visual art? So we tell aspects of PAFA's story throughout the exhibition, but we also wanted to pull out, or sort of take a 10,000-foot view in certain cases and think more broadly about, what does the very specific PAFA story tell us about a much bigger story about American art identity and nationhood.
Before we go on a wonderful tour of the exhibition that you've organized, for those who haven't had the opportunity to visit yet, could you just share, sort of as an introduction, how it's organized, the major sections that visitors can look forward to?
Sure. Yeah. So we broke out the show over 4 sections that are based around themes. This is not a chronological introduction to 200 years of American art, as the title of the exhibition might suggest. We have over 2 centuries of American art represented. But we wanted to put works across those 2 centuries into conversation with one another to get us thinking about these kind of big ideas that I mentioned before. And so you'll see works by 19th and 20th century artists hanging side by side. You'll see works of various media hanging side by side. And that was one of the things that we thought very carefully about as we presented the shows. What are the relationships we're building within this great collection that you even might not see when you visit PAFA in, when these works are at home. So the show, as I said, these 4 thematic sections are history in the making, which is a section that, each section of the exhibition begins with a prompt or a question to help get the visitor to think about their own sort of personal relationship with the themes and stories at play. So how does making art help us make sense of our history is the question we lead with in the history in the making section. Then we move into a section called We the People, which, intentionally pulling on these ideas about personal identity, individual identity, and our collective relationship to one another. And the section asks, how and why does representation matter, especially for those who have struggled to be seen as part of the American story? How can we think about the history of the portrait in American art maybe differently or anew? Then a third section called Where Liberty Dwells comes from a quote by Benjamin Franklin, a great resident of Philadelphia who has his fingerprints all over that city. And he once said, where liberty dwells, there is my country. So that section, which is largely pictures of everyday life, domestic life, urban space, some still life scenes, is a way of asking the question, how do scenes of everyday life reflect the founding freedoms of the United States? And, for which communities and which places, for whom are those promises not delivered? So we're sort of thinking about 2 sides of the American story here, what's promised and what remains to be delivered. And then we close with a section called American Prospects, which is largely landscapes and some still life paintings that ask the question, how does the landscape or our larger environment, our natural world, help us understand our place in a wider world of relationships? And that title, American Prospects, is an intentional play on words because the notion of the prospect is about a view, what we see when we look out onto a landscape. And there's an optimism to the notion of prospect, that something prospective and hoped for. But prospecting with the landscape is looking at the land and saying, what can I gain from it? What can I extract from it? How can I commercialize the landscape? And all those things have been always at play within our history of this country and our relationship to the natural world. These notions of bounty and freedom and open, vast landscapes available for us and for the sort of promised future, but also the flip side of that too.
With that as a wonderful overview, let's take advantage of the terrific selection of images you've put together that highlight the different sections and main points of the exhibition. So please start sharing the images for us to enjoy.
Is that looking okay? You can see everything?
That looks great. Very familiar.
Well, good. So for those of you who have not been to Penn before, of course, I wanted to just help you walk in the door from our main entrance with the Making History banner greeting you. This great painting by William Sidney Mount called The Painter's Triumph, which we thought was the perfect way to kick off the show as you enter the museum and then move through the atrium into our galleries. And I'll move us now into another building just for a moment, because I think it's important to ground the experience of the show at Penn with an understanding of where this collection comes from. So PAFA, as I said, has a long history in training artists and displaying the work of American artists. Founded in 1805 by 2 artists, Charles Wilson Peale, a painter, among many other things, and William Rush, a sculptor. And they opened PAFA to be the nation's first museum and school of art. Um, and eventually, over the course of the 1800s, PAFA moves through a few different locations in the city until 1876, when they inaugurate this incredible building. It's now known as the Historic Landmark Building, but it was designed by George Hewitt and Frank Furness to be a new home for PAFA and offer both a space to display its rich collection, as you can see in the grand staircase view on the right, and also a space for the training of the artists who attended the academy. And both a kind of a marvelous work of late 19th century Victorian art, combining this kind of Gothic revival with these mansard roofs and this French style, and the pointed polychrome arches that look like a kind of Moroccan architecture. This eclecticism of the Furness Hewitt style. But it was also an amazing work of engineering, because there had to be great light and there had to be air circulation and a stable climate for both the making and display of works of art in this building. So this, I should also say, this exhibition is only happening because the Historic Landmark Building is closed for renovations, and it will reopen in 2026 for America's 250th and for the 150th anniversary of this building. So yeah, that also is what occasioned this traveling exhibition. And you see, there's no subtlety when it comes to the red, white, and blue color scheme of the interior, with those silver stars on a field of blue, as if you've kind of left one space by entering PAFA's building, the industrial space of the city, and you've reemerged into the grand staircase, into this kind of alternate exotic space for the experience of great works of art. So
for the 10 minutes or so that we have left, be interesting now to get a highlight of some of the works of art that you've prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of orienting you as we move through the show, and I've already mentioned how the exhibition is laid out, but to kind of place you in the exhibition, hopefully entice you to come see these things in person. The first section, as I mentioned, is a way of thinking about how artists have helped us understand our relationship to the American past. And in the case of this work by Alice Neel, which is one of the works we start out the show with, how have artists tried to portray history unfolding in the present? And this is compared to some great works of what we call history painting, 19th century, even 18th century painting, you might not look at this and say, this is a painting about history, but Alice Neel thought it was. She felt it was important in 1933 to document what is called an investigation of poverty by the Russell Sage Foundation, which is what we see here. You see this woman at the center of what seems like an interrogation. These individuals from the foundation who Neel felt were much more interested in understanding the kind of root causes of poverty, but not so interested in doing anything to resolve it. She said they never gave any money to serve the poor. And this woman who is sitting in this chair, stricken with grief, hiding her face, is both, we get this keen sense of her own personal experience. Neel said this was a woman who was found living under an overturned car with 7 children, where this is the height of the Depression in the 1930s, but also the fact that she could be so many different people who were facing the burden of poverty in this really dark period of American history. So, history painting is not just images of the past, but it's also the ways that artists have a keen sense of saying history is happening right now, and here's where it's happening.
Just to interject very briefly, I have to say, once I had a sense of the background of that piece, I think it might be my favorite of the entire exhibition, definitely up there for just the type of commentary that you provided. But please continue, Jeff.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's I had to start the show with it. I mean, I agree. It's one of the most powerful works in the whole exhibition. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to kind of point to a couple great works in the show, but only talk at length about a few. Horace Pippin's John Brown Going to His Hanging from 1942, another great work in the show where Pippin is creating his own form of history painting, looking back at Brown, this abolitionist hero and martyr who is executed after his failed raid on Harper's Ferry and the federal arsenal there, in an attempt to overthrow the institution of slavery in this country. And then here is our kind of salon hang space for, we wanted to both think about the particular stories within each of the works in the section, but also hang them together in a way that evokes the history of this collection, which was often displayed in this style. Too many great things to talk about here. Another great work by Andrew Wyeth called Young America, painted in 1950. Wyeth is certainly thinking about American history here, because this is, what does it mean for America to really begin again in 1950 after World War II in the Cold War era? And then we move into that We the People section that I shared about before. Here's Charles Willson Peale, co-founder of PAFA, pulling back the curtain on another museum that he helped found, Peale's Philadelphia Museum. This is painted in 1822. And I think here's where we see the Philadelphia history and Salem history really coming together, because the story of PAFA and someone like Peale, and the story of PEM, founded in 1799, so 6 years before PAFA, there are ways that they're different. I mean, PAFA is an art school. It's a museum of fine art by living American artists when it begins. PEM, or the East Indian Marine Society, is interested in global culture, but it's also, both of them as institutions are saying, okay, we are at the beginning of a new nation. How does art and culture help create discerning citizens who are aware of their relationship to a much wider world? And the East Indian Marine Society was not just collecting art, but it was also collecting animal specimens and kind of trying to create a sense of an order to a world coming out of, in a way, the kind of chaos and uncertainty of a revolution. So a lot to say about this painting, but we can't spend too much time on it here, unfortunately. Come see this one too. And then just putting you in the space again, one of the things that we really tried to do, as I said, with this exhibition was create conversations between these objects that sort of exceed what we can say with the words in our labels. So at the center, you see this George Washington portrait by Gilbert Stuart, painted in 1796 for the British Prime Minister, which is kind of interesting. This painting of the first American president, which was an effort to try to say, what does an American president look like? Because there has not been in the history of Western art a leader of a democratic republic. You know how to paint a king, you know how to paint an aristocrat. How do you paint a leader of a republic, of a commander in chief, all the things that the body of the president stands for? And the fact that this painting was sent across the Atlantic to the Marquis of Lansdowne, the British Prime Minister, as a kind of act of diplomacy. But what we see here is that portraits have often privileged certain individuals throughout American history. And we tried to put Washington's portrait into conversation with paintings like the one on the right, William Merritt Chase's portrait of his wife, Mrs. C, as it's called, or Robert Henry's painting on the left of Ruth St. Denis before her famous Peacock Dance in 1919. How can we bring forward other individuals who often are not privileged in these histories of representation, and create conversations that, just even that placement of George Washington's extended hand and Ruth St. Denis' sort of turn and rebuff of his gesture is not coincidental. But also the power in the 20th century of celebrity. Robert Henry talked about this painting as a mighty propaganda. He knew the power of Ruth St. Denis' persona and the rise of what's called the kind of rise of the cult of personality, where one's character was not important, the kind of inner virtue, but now in the 20th century, your kind of outward charisma. And that's what Henry's portrait also demonstrates. I don't want to get us bogged down in all these examples, but yeah, so so much. Two portraits also really powerful, I think, of James Brantley, a not very well known artist who studied at PAFA. The painting on the left is self-portrait when he's returned home from serving in Vietnam, the Vietnam War. And the very same year, a painting by Barclay Hendricks of James Brantley, and the kind of power and coolness of Brantley on the right. The same artist, the same year, in two very different, but no less, equally powerful guises. Um, Mary Cassatt. I think the other thing that's important to think about here is the role of women artists in PAFA's history, who were admitted quite early on. PAFA is one of the first art academies to admit women for study, and also to admit African American artists for study.
Mm.
And one thing this show really tries to do is many of those artists that people say, why have I never heard of them before? Cassatt might not be one of them. People might be familiar with her. But many others in the show, the ways that women artists were instrumental to the unfolding of American art history. And Cassatt might be known in the US as an artist, but she also is no less important for the ways that she brought French Impressionism to the United States. She was the kind of key go-between for so many American collectors who bought French Impressionism and helped create the kind of places in this country that have become the centers for Impressionist painting, the National Gallery, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The collectors who gave their works to those collections learned about those artists because they knew Mary Cassatt, and she got them connected with Monet and all the other big names we know.
Jeff, in the 2 minutes, unfortunately, we have left, not going to be able to take advantage of some of the wonderful other examples and your background information, which is so informative. But thinking back now, what do you hope visitors come away with thinking or feeling after visiting Making History?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the questions that we ask at the end of the show is, the emphasis of the exhibition is the role of artists in understanding our relationship to the past, to history, and the different times, people, and places that help sort of helped us create a relationship to this larger history that we're a part of. And that is a question we want people to think about and kind of think about in their own experience. Is there a person, is there a place, is there a time in your life where you've understood your connection to a much bigger story, to a much kind of wider history? For us with Making History, this is the key role of artists, but for you it might be a relative or a place you always visited, or a particular moment in your life where you were struck by being connected to a much bigger story than yourself. But that, for us, that's the power of art and of the artist, and that's our goal with as museums and as a museum curator, to lay that out for our public.
And another great example of the interactive nature that you and other curators bring to the exhibition, especially the final activity that is often a reflection of what we've just experienced. And that works so well, and definitely enjoyed doing that when I have the opportunity. Well, you've definitely enticed us, definitely enticed me to want to go back soon to see and appreciate some of the other work that I didn't have the chance to ponder about and enjoy. And want to let viewers know that they have the opportunity until September 21st to tour this just outstanding exhibition. So, Jeff, first of all, congratulations again, and thank you so much for taking the time to provide this wonderful overview of Making History.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And continued success with future endeavors.
Thank you so much.
Also want to thank those of you watching for joining us and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.